it's not that Europe hasn't responded to the situation very seriously. It's really the problem is that the only language that Putin respects is force.
Lots of warm words in that summit at the White House between Presidents Macron and Trump. What do you think was the key thing that we heard from them in their 40 minutes or so news conference?
Yes, there were an awful lot of warm words, an awful lot of sort of touches on the shoulder, touches on the knee, I think, at one point. I mean, extraordinary kind of body language between these two men who at one point were sitting there with sort of legs sort of spread apart, almost mansplaining to the audience of journalists gathered around them. But in terms of what actually was achieved or what agreement was made, I must say I'm very, very skeptical indeed. I mean, Emmanuel Macron has been trying very hard to put a positive gloss, clearly, on the whole day's events. He'd been told by Trump in return that he'd been doing a tremendous job. Macron said there'd been a turning point in our discussions. But, if you look at the substance of what has been decided, there hasn't been an awful lot. I mean, it's like they're almost on two planets. You have Trump, who is determined to do a peace deal, who is determined to talk to the Russians without saying what he's going to demand from the Russians in return, is also determined to extract from Ukraine large amounts of rare earths, in a sense, as Trump sees it, to get payment for all the money that America has spent on defending Ukraine. And you have Macron, who is there as a representative of the other European governments and also Britain, although Sir Keir Starmer will be going there on Thursday, who is basically trying to get a fair deal for Ukraine, a lasting peace for Ukraine, and also looking for some way for Europeans to be involved in it.
And Donald Trump did seem to be clear that he would accept a role for European troops, certainly in keeping the peace. And also, he now does seem to suggest that he might actually have a meeting with President Zelensky, belatedly, admittedly.
Yes, I mean, if you look at those two, I mean, in terms of a concession, the Europeans have said that they, together with Britain, because this is a sort of a joint British-European plan, want to put 30,000 troops into, or will be prepared to put 30,000 troops into Ukraine, very, very far back from the front line, just in various kind of strategic points, if and when a peace deal is done. So, in a sense, there is no skin off Donald Trump's nose to accept that, because that doesn't really affect the deal that he might or might not do with Putin. And I mean, I think that's the fundamental problem here. I think it was summed up by a French television journalist, who asked Donald Trump, you are going to sit down with Vladimir Putin. You want to sit down with Vladimir Putin. You're going to do a deal with him. What concessions is Vladimir Putin going to have to make? And Trump just effectively dodged the question.
Yeah, and President Putin has also been speaking this evening. He says that he also wants to achieve peace in Ukraine as quickly as possible, but claims that Zelensky is preventing this. Just finally, Peter, and briefly, if you could, the body language, the general mood from this meeting between Macron and Trump. Do you think that the French president has set the bar pretty high for Keir Starmer when he heads to Washington later in the week?
I mean, as I said, there was a lot of bonhomie and not very much substance. If Sir Keir Starmer can actually go away on Thursday with some substance, I think he will have done appreciably better than President Macron's done.
Really good to speak to you, Peter Conradi. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Lex Paulson is executive director of the School of Collective Intelligence, lecturer at the Sciences Po School in Paris, and he's a former advisor to Emmanuel Macron and also Barack Obama. Good evening to you, Dr. Paulson.
Good evening.
What do you think Emmanuel Macron achieved tonight?
Well, that the Europeans are still at the table, and that he is still leveraging what he believes to be a personal affinity with Donald Trump, or at least something that could be imagined as a friendship, although I'm not sure if Donald Trump has those in the way we understand friendship. But Macron does think that he has some chemistry with Trump that will benefit the European position as some kind of deal grows closer.
Yeah, I mean, as I was discussing with Peter Conradi there, plenty of those those grappling handshakes, a bit of mutual backslapping. The chemistry seemed to be pretty good. But do you think that Emmanuel Macron has convinced Donald Trump that he can't just stitch this up with President Putin over the heads of the Ukrainians?
Yeah, I'm sort of reminded of early in Trump's presidency when Macron went to Washington in an effort to keep America in the Paris Climate Accords. And I remember listening to their press conference at the time, and Macron creating a dazzlingly impressive four-part argument that would allow Trump to, in some ways, keep what he wanted for American autonomy while keeping America in the climate agreement. And then Trump just, the next day waved it aside. So I don't think we're talking about a situation where Macron's intellectual powers are going to make a difference in Trump's policy. I think we need to simplify things to the basic mindset of the current president, which is personal and transactional. If he thinks that France has, through its military, through its cultural power, because Trump still is impressed by France and the French role in the world, then Trump will at least make a pretense of weighing the European position. And I think that's all that Macron is hoping for, as he was in the first phase of this war, by keeping the line of communication open, that he can at least prevent the worst from happening, as he tried to do with all the shuttle diplomacy to Moscow. I don't know if it actually changed Vladimir Putin's strategy for the war one bit. I don't know if it's going to change Trump's one bit, but I do know that Macron is being exceptionally active at a time when Europe has been fearful and passive in many ways. And I think this is probably a good thing for Europe's interest, even if it's just being present on the margins and maybe influencing some decision at a critical moment.
We heard indications from President Trump that he would be happy to accept European peacekeepers. But what we didn't get to, and what didn't seem to have been raised, is this fact that what Keir Starmer has been talking about, which is the need for security guarantees, and that the US is frankly the only nation that can do that when you're up against a superpower like Russia.
No, I think that's right. I mean, can anyone think of an agreement that Vladimir Putin has respected because of integrity and goodwill? I can't think of one, right? So from 2008, 2014, the Minsk agreements, Putin cannot keep his word and won't keep his word in any deal struck with Ukraine unless he is in a rational, can rationally calculate that he is threatened if he oversteps a line. And in this case, he no longer has America and its world-leading military in front of him. If he crosses any line, he will only have the EU. Now, of course, France is the largest military in the EU. France and Germany together have led the EU in military spending on an absolute basis. Of course, Poland is the largest in terms of per capita spending. So it's not that Europe hasn't responded to the situation very seriously. It's really the problem is that the only language that Putin respects is force. And if you take away the American force, not only take it away, but really have American power putting their thumb on the scale for the other side, aside, this certainly puts Europe in a very, very dire situation.
Just very briefly, if you could, it does seem as though what Donald Trump wants out of this, again, is a financial payback for some of the billions that the US has put into this. Just briefly, if you could.
Yeah, I mean, again, don't overcomplicate things when it comes to understanding Donald Trump. He, fortunately, the one fortunate thing you can say, he's not messianic. He doesn't believe that it's going to bring about the end of the world. He's a capitalist. And so by making a deal for Ukrainian and possibly Russian rare earth minerals, he will enrich himself, his business interests, Jared Kushner, et cetera. That is the best thing that can be said for the situation, is that it might end the conflict, but it will certainly lead to enriching Donald Trump and the oligarchy running American politics.
Dr. Lex Paulson, really good to speak to you. Thank you so much.